Ethiopia, the home of coffee, and according to local traditions, the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ethiopian civilization is one of the oldest in the world, but it is also a nation racked by immense troubles. In the late 2010s, international media touted Ethiopia as a country that is rising from the ashes of its past to become a new African superpower. But on November 3rd, 2020, this dream came crashing down. Anywhere between 80,000 to 500,000 civilians died in the subsequent Tigrayan war, and even after the war ended exactly 2 years after, the country continues to be racked with civil conflict and instability, while the ruling government continues to reportedly engage in egregious human rights violations. The future of Ethiopia remains uncertain. So one may ask, what happened? To answer this question, one has to look far back, to the very beginnings of Ethiopian civilization. What happened? How did the institutions and structures that made up the Ethiopian state evolve over the centuries? And where did it all go wrong? Known as the Roof of Africa, the Ethiopian plateau is a mountainous landscape intercut with rivers and valleys. The Great Rift Valley splits Ethiopia in two. Formed 22 million years ago by the divergence of two tectonic plates, the Rift Valley is part of a massive geologic formation that stretches from Mozambique to Syria. In 100 million years, the tectonic plates will split the African continent in two. East of the Rift Valley lies a vast expanse of desert and savanna. Our hominid ancestors evolved in this complex web of highland, lowland, and savanna. Over 300,000 years ago, a certain group of hominids evolved into Homo sapiens. Around 150,000 years ago, many of these anatomically modern humans left Africa. Many of them crossed the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and went on to populate the world. 14,600 years ago, the Sahara turned into a humid green landscape. Many humans settled this vast savanna, full of grasses, lakes, and trees. However, around 5,500 years ago, this lush paradise quickly transformed back into a desert hellscape. One theory suggests that the Proto-Afro-Asiatic peoples originated in the Eastern Sahara, before migrating to the Middle East, North Africa, and the northern Ethiopian highlands. Agriculture was adopted in the Chalcolithic era. It most likely came to Ethiopia through the Nile Valley. The lush highlands made it easier for the locals to adopt farming, while pastoralism was favored in the drier coastal lowlands. In a sea of sand, the Ethiopian highlands became a large oasis thanks to its mountain rivers and fertile soil. The conditions of the local geography allowed for the emergence of complex societies. The ancient world lived and died from trade, and this was just as much the case for the peoples of Ethiopia. The Egyptians had long been aware of the lands of Ethiopia. As early as the Old Kingdom period, inscriptions mentioned a land far to their south, which they called Punt. The links that Egypt had with Punt were absolutely vital for its economy and society. For instance, much of Egypt's incense, which was used for both religious rituals and in daily life, was sourced from Punt. This, combined with its geographical location being east of Egypt, caused the Egyptians to refer to Punt as the land of the gods. Because of this, the Egyptians organized several expeditions to Punt. The most famous of those expeditions was Queen Hatshepsut's expedition during the New Kingdom period. During the expedition, the locals offered gold, ivory, apes, and myrrh trees in exchange for beads and weapons. As trade continued, spices, incense, animal hides, and slaves were sourced from Punt, while fragments of Egyptian pottery, scarabs, and beads were found in northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. The Red Sea acted as the primary conduit for commercial movement, but the Nile River Valley was also an important trade route. After the 2nd millennium BCE, the Ethiopians widened their links with the Middle East and the Mediterranean world. The most consequential of those ties happened to be with the neighboring peoples of South Arabia. Earlier historiographies claimed that the Ethio-Semitic peoples emerged from South Arabians colonizing the land and intermixing with the locals, but more recent evidence suggests that South Arabian settlement was limited to the coast for a short period of time. As early as the 1000s BCE, the South Arabians made contact with the Ethiopians. What came was not physical colonization but cultural transmission. These cultural interactions resulted with the Ethiopians adopting the old South Arabian alphabet. Simultaneously, the gods that were worshipped by the South Arabians were also embraced by the locals. Around the 10th century BCE, a kingdom known as Damat emerged. Very little is known about Damat. Their capital was likely in Yeha, which contains the ruins of a temple for the Sabaean moon god Al-Makka. It was an agricultural civilization which grew millet, made iron tools and weapons, used plows, and dug irrigation. Even less is known about the period between the fall of Tamrat and the rise of Aksum. Two historians, Christopher Ehret and Merid Aregay, offer a very compelling theory for how the state emerged in Ethiopia. The South Arabians would have encountered a mix of Semitic-speaking pastoralists in the coastal regions and Cushitic-speaking agriculturalists in the highlands. The pastoralists continually migrated into the highlands, constantly entering into conflict with the agriculturalists. As the pastoralists subjugated the highlanders, leaders, instead of expropriating the lands for themselves, they formed a separate social class which lived off tribute extraction from the farmers. Even as some of the pastoralists settled, this social arrangement persisted. This is partially evidenced by the large number of Cushitic-derived agricultural terms in Ge'ez. Trade was the other important element in the process of state formation. By the time the Ptolemies established themselves in Egypt, trade with the eastern Mediterranean greatly expanded, particularly due to increased demand for elephants and ivory in Mediterranean and Iranian markets. This gave Semitic-speaking rulers incentive to form hunting bands composed of young men from various tribes and clans who were led by the most experienced fighter among them. The bands would have needed to claim, patrol, and protect their hunting grounds and trade routes, which would have inevitably led them into conflict with rival hunting bands. To resolve disputes, the bands would unite into larger groups. With trade bringing increased wealth, some of those band leaders might have been incentivized to settle down and set up structures that managed the expanding revenue streams. This would have transformed these band leaders into chiefs and kings. As a patchwork of tribes and kingdoms emerged, a town was founded by Ge'ez rulers on a base of Cushitic Agau agriculturalists. This town would forever be known as Aksum. Aksum is located in a geographically advantageous spot. The region's abundant rainfall, forest cover, and fertile soil made it possible to produce multiple crops annually. More importantly, the city sat on an important trade route from the Nile to the port of Adulis. This gave Aksum the ability to control and exploit the region's traffic for their benefit. Because of this, the settlement attracted many newcomers. With an agricultural surplus, the city was able to support a large population of laborers, craftsmen, soldiers, and administrative officials. With such extensive human and financial capital at its fingertips, the city was able to rise above its neighbors and transform into a fully fledged kingdom. History would forever remember this state as the Kingdom of Aksum. The kingdom became constantly engaged in military expansion to secure its borders and expand its commercial influence. As Aksum subjugated tribe after tribe, many of the conquered rulers were incorporated into the power hierarchy as sub-kings, or negus, ruled by a king of kings, or negusa nagast. While the state managed to assimilate many tribes into the dominant culture, and gradually replaced traditional rulers with loyal servants, some tribes managed to retain their identity long after their subjugation. This is evidenced by reports of tribal rebellions occurring well into the Aksumite period. Such extensive conquests and the constant risk of rebellion and banditry warranted the state to maintain a large army. The army was composed of numerous regiments, who likely derived their origins from those clan-based hunting bands. To man and maintain those regiments, two practices emerged that continued well into Solomonic times. The first was capturing young men from conquered areas and recruiting them into the army. More importantly, a system of troop maintenance was developed. Stemming from the pre-existing structure of pastoral elites living off tribute extraction, the Aksumite state developed a system where tribute was not centrally collected and stored, but assigned to individual regiments. The tribute was used to maintain the troops, meaning the state was able to avoid paying them with the currency. This arrangement would lay the bedrock for the gold system, a characteristically feudal socioeconomic system which defined ancient and medieval Ethiopian society. The earliest written mention of Aksum comes from the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a document written by an anonymous Egyptian Greek author in the 1st century AD. The Periplus details the commercial routes, ports, and trading opportunities for Greco-Roman merchants in the Indian Ocean. He described a king named Zoskales, who was either the king of Aksum or the ruler of a small coastal region. He was reported to have been fluent in Greek and familiar with classical Greek literature. This is testament to the fact that by the time the Periplus was written, trade with the eastern Mediterranean world had brought Aksum firmly into the Greco-Roman cultural sphere. This was to the extent that Greek was the official and literary language of the kingdom. Prior to the emergence of Aksumite coinage in 270 AD, the only sources we have for Aksumite kings come from South Arabian inscriptions. Aksum had a long and complicated relationship with South Arabia. The region was defined by regular conflict between its major states, such as Saba, Himyar, Kantaban, and Hadramut. The Aksumites would play power politics in the region, siding with the various states in exchange for land and influence. As a result, Aksum gradually carved out an empire of direct and indirect control across the Red Sea. This was essential for Aksumite trading interests, as they took control over both the maritime and land-based trade routes of the Red Sea and South Arabia respectively. Aksum also regularly campaigned against its neighboring tribes and states in Africa. The Monumentum Adulitanum described an anonymous king sending expeditions ranging from Nubia to modern-day Somaliland. King Endubis was the first to mint coins in Aksum, making it the only sub-Saharan African country to do so in ancient times. The coins were written in Greek and showed a pre-Christian disc and crescent symbol, to show devotion to the pagan gods of Arabia. The adoption of coinage was important for several reasons. reasons. Firstly, it was an effective form of propaganda. Aksum was able to project its power as far as India. Coins also lifted the burden of having to use barter to negotiate transactions, making trade far easier. Around 20 years between the death of Endubis and the accession of Ezana, there were at least 3 kings: Aphilias, Wazeba, and Wasanas. In all likelihood, those kings were regularly engaged in intrigue and violent power struggles. The different players in those struggles likely had their power bases in the many regiments of the Aksumite army. This meant that political alliances, ethnic and regional loyalties among the regiments played a crucial role in power politics. The kings that inherited power from their fathers rather than gaining it violently were spared from constantly devoting their time and energy to secure the throne. The 2 most notable emperors in Aksumite history, Ezana and Caleb, were likely blessed to have inherited those positions, and it was Ezana who made one of the most important decisions in Ethiopian history. An account of the events that led to Ezana's conversion to Christianity were documented by the Roman Christian historian Rufinus. In the account, a Tyrian philosopher named Meropius took his 2 nephews, Frumentius and Odysseus, on a voyage to India. While resting in a Red Sea port, the ship was attacked by pirates who massacred all of the Romans except the 2 boys, who sold them into slavery. They were eventually brought into the court of the Aksumite king. The 2 Roman Phoenicians gained favor with the king and were gradually promoted to positions of power. The brothers used it to earn their freedom. Following the king's death, the widowed queen requested the brothers to stay and govern the kingdom while their heir, Ezana, was too young to rule. Frumentius became Ezana's tutor, who used his position to promote Christianity in the empire by encouraging Christian merchants to practice their faith openly. A few natives even converted in the process. When the prince came of age, Odysseus returned to Tyre and became a priest, while Frumentius, eager to convert Aksum, went to Alexandria. There he requested the Patriarch of Alexandria, Athanasius, to send priests and missionaries to the country, which he agreed to do so. After returning to Ethiopia, Frumentius converted Ezana, now king, to Christianity. The Roman was made the first priest of the new Ethiopian church, which was made part of the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria. Political considerations may have also played a role in Ezana's conversion. With Constantine's conversion in the Roman Empire, Christianity's prestige and propaganda value skyrocketed. The already large presence of Christian merchants from Rome were now given impetus to increase their proselytization. As Aksum already had a close relationship with Rome, the addition of Christianity allowed the kingdom to pursue closer political and economic ties with the empire. However, this did not indicate a full submission to Rome, evidenced when Ezana refused a request from Emperor Constantius II to replace Frumentius with an Arian bishop. The initial conversion did not open Ethiopia to proselytization, as Ezana and Frumentius had to contend with powerful anti-Christian forces in the country. Frumentius's initial congregation likely only consisted of members of the royal court, foreign merchants, and their households. The faith gradually spread in the city of Aksum and along the major trade routes to other cities, while some of the temples were converted into churches. However, there were several difficulties in propagating Ethiopian Christianity. Firstly, no translations of the scripture existed in Ge'ez, so the language of the church was Greek. Combined with the fact that most of the clergy were likely foreigners, this made Christianity difficult to be accessible to the wider population. All of this meant that Christian expansion was very limited. It wasn't until a century later that Christianity made real headway in Aksum. Besides his conversion, Ezana also famously campaigned in Nubia, culminating with the destruction of the capital city of Meroe. This was likely the final blow to the long-declining Kushite kingdom, which collapsed into the 3 Nubian states of Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia. The period between Ezana's and Caleb's reign is far less attested in the historical record. The gap of knowledge may indicate that the court was embroiled in constant power struggles. Despite the political chaos, the period also saw a series of evangelization efforts that made a huge impact on Ethiopian Christianity. Starting in the late 5th century, groups of Roman Syrian missionaries known as the Tzadkan were brought over to settle and proselytize in Ethiopia. Among the monks was a group known as the 9 Saints. Traditionally said to have originated in Roman Syria, they likely came from across the empire. The 9 Saints assisted with translating the Bible into Ge'ez, expanded the church in the Aksumite heartland, and established monasteries across the country. These monasteries became training centers for local converts, and assisted in bringing the natives into the foreign-dominated church hierarchy. Members of the clergy would go out and establish schools in their native parishes, which offered education to the members of their congregation. The kings encouraged this process by giving economic and prestige benefits to the evangelizers. Due to the efforts of the Tzadkan and the 9 Saints, Christianity became firmly established in the Aksumite heartland. In the 510 CE, the most famous and well-documented emperor in Aksumite history ascended. His name was Caleb. History remembers Caleb for his conquest of Himyar. The immediate cause of the conflict was the massacre of the Christian community in Najran, perpetrated by the Jewish king Dhu Nuwas. The resulting outrage in the Christian world prompted the Eastern Roman Empire to push Caleb to intervene, to which he obliged. Emperor Caleb invaded Himyar in 525 AD. The Aksumites routed Dhu Nuwas's army, took control of the territory, and appointed a Himyarite Christian named Sumyafa Ashwa as the viceroy of Yemen. The invasion was part of an escalating proxy war between the Sassanid and Eastern Roman empires. This was shown by Dhu Nuwas's conversion to Judaism was likely a political move, as it allowed the king to curry favor with the Sassanids. Meanwhile, the Romans sent troops to fight along Aksum during the invasion of Himyar. The Aksumite occupation of Himyar was intended to create an anti-Persian containment bloc, with the Eastern Roman Empire at its center. However, problems quickly beset the Aksumite rule in Yemen. 4 years after the war, Sumyafa Ashwa was overthrown in a rebellion, and rule was usurped by an Aksumite general named Abreha. Despite attempts to reassert control, Abreha managed to maintain independence from Aksum, while expanding into neighboring Saba and Hadramut. His reign was a productive one, as he rebuilt churches destroyed in the massacre and even repaired a burst dam in Merid. However, Abreha is best known for launching an attack on Mecca. Islamic sources report that he intended to destroy the Kaaba, only to be repelled by the defending tribal coalition, in what Islamic sources refer to as the Year of the Elephant. Abreha was succeeded by his son, Masruk ibn Abraha. However, his reign would be very short-lived. In 570 CE, Sassanid forces under the command of General Vahes invaded Himyar and defeated the Aksumite rulers. They restored a former Himyarite king named Saif ibn Diyazan back to his throne as a Persian vassal. However, the Persians later annexed the province following a failed Aksumite uprising. The loss of Yemen represented a serious blow to Aksum, because the Sassanid Empire was able to block the Red Sea and Arabian trade routes, which hindered Aksum's economic power in the region. While Caleb was made famous due to his actions in Yemen, he was also responsible for a much more impactful process, southward expansion. Much of Ethiopian historiography on this chapter of history is based on hagiographies, which were not written until the 13th century, so take the following with a grain of salt. In the late 3rd century, Aksum began a process of military expansion into Agau lands in the southern frontier. During Caleb's reign, those campaigns intensified. 2 Agau provinces, Wag and Lasta, were fully Christianized and made integral parts of the kingdom. These 2 provinces would later become important in Ethiopia's story. This is what we call in this business foreshadowing. The campaign of Christian expansion and evangelization reflected a general trend of Christianization in Northeast Africa. Between 543 and 580 CE, the Nubian pagan states of Nabatea, Makuria, and Alodia were converted to Christianity. This was spearheaded by the Eastern Roman Empire, done with the intention to stop constant border clashes in the Egyptian frontier. However, the conversion happened during a period of intense religious controversy. Jacobite and Orthodox factions fought and schemed in Constantinople, as the direction of Nubian Christianity was put into question. Aksum was part of this struggle for episcopal influence, shown by the fact that the earliest missionaries in Alodia were likely Aksumite. The Tzadkan and the 9 saints that played such a crucial role in Ethiopian Christianity would not have emerged if it weren't for the religious politics of the time. They, alongside the Alexandrian Church, believed in the Monophysite doctrine, which asserted that the nature of Jesus Christ was singular and entirely divine, even when he appeared in human form. This position was rejected by the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD, who instead asserted that the nature of Jesus was both human and divine, and that those 2 natures coexisted with one another. This doctrine would be known as Diophysitism. The Monophysites found themselves in danger of persecution by Chalcedonian-aligned authorities, so many likely fled to Ethiopia, a process that was encouraged by the Coptic Church, who wanted to bring a powerful nation under their influence. While practically no written records of church life exist at the time, it is clear that the doctrinal and liturgical traditions of Ethiopian Christianity were established in the first 4 centuries since its founding. By the time the Egyptian Greek traveler Cosmas Indicopleostis visited Aksum in the 6th century, he described the kingdom's heartland being firmly Christianized, with churches, bishops, monks, and recluses everywhere he went. The church's strength allowed it to survive long periods of intermittent contact with Alexandria, despite what the country would go through in its final centuries. When explaining social phenomena such as the decline and fall of a complex society, rarely can its causes be pinned down to one factor. The difficulty of this period is compounded by the scarcity of evidence from the late Aksumite period. However, historians have been able to draw a broad outline for developments that have marked the final centuries of Aksum. By the mid-7th century, the heavily forested and fertile region around the city of Aksum had become exhausted due to centuries of continuous development and deforestation. The country's troubles were compounded by increasingly erratic rainfall caused by a change changing climate. This was made worse by external geopolitical developments, starting with the Persian takeover of Yemen, which significantly reduced revenues from trade. However, a greater geopolitical force would trump even Persian power, that of Islam. Despite Muhammad's amicable relations with Aksum, who notably spared the country from jihad, the Islamic caliphates would represent a death blow to Aksumite power. Islam quickly spread along the coastal regions of the Horn of Africa. Islamic navies overpowered the Aksumite fleet, while the takeover of Egypt meant a loss of contact with Byzantine merchants. Even the port city of Adulis was taken over by the Muslims. This led Aksum to losing its once dominant position in the Red Sea, meaning it could no longer benefit from the Red Sea trade. Due to all of these factors, the once powerful coastal cities and Aksum itself declined significantly, as the center of Ethiopian civilization began shifting southwards. Despite losing access to international trade, the Aksumite state was able to survive for far longer. This was because of how the army was structured, where the state maintained the army by assigning tribute rather than paying with currency. This meant that even when the coffers were empty, the army was still being paid. However, the army also played a crucial role in the decline and disintegration of Aksum. Each regiment had a name, and with it came a sense of identity and prestige that was passed down from generation to generation. While the manner in which rebellious commanders and regiments were punished is unknown, in all likelihood it involved two practices that were present in medieval times. The first was the transfer of regiments to areas with low action, meaning there was little opportunity to gain glory and loot through combat. The second and more severe punishment was a process called rustication. It involved stripping a regiment of its privileges and degrading it to the rank of peasantry. The first records of the practice emerged in the late Middle Ages, but in all likelihood it began in Aksumite times. Sometimes, rusticated regiments had opportunities to recover their former status by putting down insurrections. Many rusticated soldiers intermarried with the peasantry, who passed down stories of their former prestige and glory to the local population. This meant that over time, different local populations would inherit the identity and stories of former prestige that their forefathers held, leading to increasingly regionalized identities. For the standing army, the state was able to provide clothes, weapons, and other items for their maintenance in periods of stability. However, the hard times of late antiquity gave the soldiers restlessness and a temptation to loot. This was not helped by the fact that most of the regiments were stationed in areas of high discontent. So you have a lot of regiments with long histories of playing power politics, many of whom were likely rusticated due to picking the losing side, combined with a declining state unable to maintain the troops, a burning desire to restore former glory, strong regional and ethnic identities, and a severely weakened monarchy. You have the perfect conditions for restlessness, marauding, and warlordism. And within those conditions of warlordism and societal decline, several notable figures emerged. One of them was a warlord named Danael. He was probably a general who campaigned in modern-day Eritrea, before usurping an ineffective emperor. Being one of the few recorded warlords of the period, Danael might have been of Agau origin. This could have represented the precursor to the succeeding Agau-ruled Zagwe dynasty. Around the 10th century, an emperor named Degnajan was described by later chroniclers as an ardent evangelizer of the southern frontier. Despite the weakened state of the kingdom, Degnajan continued the process of continual southward expansion. He also reportedly shifted the capital during military campaigns, continuing a practice that lasted through the Middle Ages. He was also likely responsible for establishing new military colonies in conquered areas. This started in pre-Christian times, but intensified after Christianization, as the establishment of military colonies allowed for easier control, assimilation, and evangelization of the frontier. The most dramatic personality of the late Aksumite period was the infamous Queen Gudit. Sources on her are few and highly contradictory. Some say she was a pagan, a lapsed Christian, a Jew, an Agau, or a Beja. She is said to have led a pagan rebellion against the Christian kingdom, destroying numerous churches and laying waste to the land. In some sources, she even killed the emperor and ruled Aksum for 40 years. Her fame was noted by contemporary Arabic writers, who wrote of a figure they called the Queen of Habashat. One compelling theory suggests that Gudit was a Sidama from the Sasu region in modern-day southern Ethiopia. The area had long felt the brunt of Aksumite presence through caravans that extracted gold and slaves from the region. This would have fueled the hatred that Gudit and her people felt against everything Aksumite and Christian, which led Gudit to galvanize the pagan rebellion against the kingdom. Regardless of who she was or when she ruled, most sources agree that Gudit was responsible for the final weakening of the Aksumite state. At some point, we reach what in most traditions is the final king, Dilnaud. He was overthrown at some point, and a new dynasty took power in the remnants of the former kingdom. This marked the end of Aksum and the beginning of the Zagwe dynasty. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Due to personal life reasons and frankly a terrible lack of organization, this video was basically in development hell. I hope to avoid these mistakes in the future and deliver videos in a more timely manner, although life and personal projects may impede such. I hope to turn this into a 3-part series on the history of Ethiopia, its politics, economics, culture, and more. If you enjoyed this and wish to see more, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe with notifications on, and if you wish to support me, I have a Ko-Fi. The link is in the description. I hope you have a wonderful day.